Donald Trump is on the brink of ordering a war with Iran, or he's on the brink of having an historic peace. It's hard to know which at this point, and there are signals that kind of lean in both directions. So really everything is possible, but something appears to be happening. It doesn't look like we're just going to continue careening on down the road doing nothing. So it won't be boring, but hopefully it will end in a good place, which will get the risk of war off the table, because we definitely don't want to go down the other path. And to try to now help make some sense out of this, and to really get into the weeds about what's going on here, so people can have a better understanding of why there seems to be these two really divergent possibilities, is Defense Priorities' Dan Depetris, a guy I've been friends with for a long time, been on the show before. Been a while since we've been on. So first of all, Dan, thanks for coming back on the show.
Of course. Thank you, Danny. Appreciate you having me.
Listen, I thought of you when we were talking about this Iran situation, because you track this probably closer than anybody does anywhere. Now, I consider you definitely a subject matter expert on all this stuff. As difficult as it is to read the tea leaves, but you follow it really closely. Just what do you make of this possibility? Because Gary, one other video I think we have up there, I don't remember if I asked for it, from Donald Trump on the 7th of March. Do you have that one? Okay, yeah. If we can, this is when people talk about Trump was looking to, maybe go to war with Iran. Actually, in March, it looked like he had almost made the decision already when he said this from the Oval Office. Sorry, it wasn't quite queued up yet. I threw.
Oh yeah. I gotta go get it. I'll get it for us.
Oh, sorry. All right. Well, we'll get back to that in a second. But while we're waiting on that, just Dan, kind of give me your overall impression of why this is such a complex issue, and why is there actually even a better question to start off with that? Why is there now such an urgency within the administration to try and solve this problem now?
Right. Well, I think President Trump has probably come to the conclusion that there's really only two ways of dealing with the Iranian nuclear issue. Right. It's through military force, which would be at best a short-term Band-Aid solution that would probably buy you a couple months, if not a year. Or you have the diplomatic option, which potentially essentially rolls back the program to such an extent that the international community will be confident enough to know that the program won't be weaponized in the future. And Trump is somebody who carries a big stick, and he likes to threaten military force, it seems like, every other day. But when it comes down to it, he's pretty reticent, I think, of actually using the stick, particularly when the diplomatic option hasn't been exhausted yet. So I think this is Trump basically preferring diplomacy over a potential military operation that could, worst comes to worst, could snowball into a regional conflict.
And let's actually get a running start into this by running, first of all, back to the previous administration of Trump, starting in 2017, when, of course, he famously pulled out of the JCPOA, the Obama nuclear deal, with the claim at the time that he was going to negotiate a better deal. And he said one of the big problems he found with the Obama deal is that it didn't include long-range missiles, the delivery system, et cetera, and he wanted to get a better deal than that. What happened from, say, I think it was May 2018 until the end of his term? Why was no deal ever renegotiated at that time?
Well, the Trump administration essentially had maximum objectives, and I think that's probably the reason why his attempts to negotiate with the Iranians failed in the end. A lot of people don't remember this, but back in 2019, a year after he pulled out of the JCPOA, he actually was willing to speak to President Hassan Rouhani, who was, of course, the Iranian president at the time. And it got to such a point where French President Emmanuel Macron was actually serving as an intermediary between the two men. And they were going to have a phone call between the two. But Rouhani at the last minute decided to basically not go down that road. The reason why it failed, diplomacy failed, is because he was essentially catering to the hardliners in his administration. In particular, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton, who essentially viewed any concessions on America's part as, the quintessential version of a Munich chamber, a Munich 1938.
It's always 1938. Man.
Of course, we're always living in the 1938. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's the reason why it fell apart. Trump was not willing to actually negotiate. He talked about it, but he wasn't actually willing to do it.
So actually, I'm sure Gary's probably got that loaded up by now. But before I play that, actually, I think there's something that I want to set the stage with a little bit more, because it's still related to what happened in the first administration when we pulled out of the JCPOA. This is Trita Parsi from, I think, a couple of days ago, addressing something that a lot of people are saying, that the breakout period for Iran keeps getting shorter, and a lot of advocates for war keep pointing to this. But Trita Parsi wanted to point out there are some caveats to this shortening of window on the bomb making capacity.
Let me first clarify one point that I think is very important to understand. They have the technical capacity to build or produce enriched uranium at weapons levels. And they have enough of significantly high enriched uranium to be able to produce enough material for one bomb, probably within 3 to 7 days. However, having the material for a bomb, the fissile material for a bomb, and having a bomb are two very different things. And it will take them probably somewhere between 1.5 years and 3 years to go to that point. And even more importantly, according to the US intelligence services, which is echoed by European and other intelligence services, they have not made a decision to build a bomb. So they're currently not active in a weapons program, but they are producing material that could be used for that. So that in and of itself is, of course, a challenge, but I don't think it is a cause for panic.
Now, the reason why I'll bring that up right here is because I know you've written a lot over the years on what was the capacity of Iran before May 2018, and from the time the Obama administration started the JCPOA in 2015, and everything since that time, because we have a lot of people, and I guess we had some clips we were actually going to show where they, especially Jack Keane and Tom Cotton, Senator Cotton, a bunch of other people say, yes, in fact, the Obama administration was the big cause of all this problem because they didn't put these brakes on, and that's the reason why Iran now has all these capacities and has more enriched uranium, et cetera. But you've written over the years that says that prior to getting out of that, their stockpiles and capabilities were lower. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, the JCPOA was at its core an imperfect deal. You know, it didn't touch the missile program. It didn't touch the Iranian support to regional militias around, you know, from Lebanon to Syria to the Palestinian territories. But what it did do is heavily constrain Iran's technical capacity to manufacture a nuclear weapon, or at least to accumulate enough enriched material to build a bomb. The Iranians essentially were forced to hand over 97 to 98% of their entire stockpile of enriched uranium out of the country. So that was pretty much neutralized for the time being. The Iranians could not breach a 3.67% cap on enriched uranium. So anything above that percentage was considered a breach of the agreement, and the Iranians did not do that. There was a heavily, essentially, a very strong, strict verification regime over the entire Iranian nuclear program. Everything from the enrichment stockpile to, manufacturing machines, the centrifuge machines that were used to churn uranium up to weapons grade. That was all monitored. So the deal itself really put Iran's nuclear program in a box, and it was a pretty strong box. When we got out of the deal, unfortunately, the Iranians had no reason to stick with it because they weren't getting sanctions relief anymore. The Trump basically reimposed all the sanctions that Obama lifted as part of the agreement, and he added new ones, by the way. So the Iranians obviously responded by breaching the nuclear enrichment limitations in the accord. And right now, I actually looked this up before coming on your show, Danny. Right now, the overall enrichment stockpile is over 8,200, so over 8,200 kilograms. And just as a comparison, when Iran was in the JCPOA, the top limit was 300 kilograms.
300.
Okay? 300 to 8,200 kilograms. And not only that, the Iranians are producing 60% enriched uranium, which is really only a technical step away from 90%, which is considered bomb grade. So not only the Iranians producing more enriched uranium, they're actually producing better enriched uranium of
And
higher quality.
do I remember correctly, Dan, that because this kind of came in stages, because as I understand, they didn't do any of these things initially when Trump withdrew, but it took maybe even a year later. But that this was always like, we'll go back to these constraints as long as you go back to abiding by the terms yourself. So meaning that, the sanctions relief, et cetera, or did they just say, hey, we're going to do whatever we want to do?
Well, in the first year, there was certainly a year delay between when Trump pulled out and when the Iranians actually responded in the nuclear domain. There was about 12 months where both parties could have negotiated an alternative arrangement or simply gotten back into the new one. I think there was a point in time where the Iranians understood that Trump was not interested in actually negotiating a new arrangement or getting back into the old one. So, they made the decision to retaliate, and this is how they did it. But there was certainly a period between 2018 and 2019 where this whole thing could have been reversed or heavily curtailed, and Trump didn't take that opportunity. And I should say, the Biden administration didn't take that opportunity either. They waited way too long before they tried to get back into the JCPOA, and at that point in time, the barn door was pretty much closed. So that's where we are.
So what was the motive for Iran to go up to this higher grade reprocessing percentages from obviously the 3.67 up to, I think then it was 20%, and then now up to 60%. I've read variously that they claim this is for research purposes or for nuclear fuel, for civilian power generation, et cetera. But others say that no, 60% is just way over the top. It's definitely only a precursor to weapons grade enrichment. How do you see that part?
Yeah, I would agree with the second interpretation. I mean, 20% enrichment is justifiable in terms of peaceful energy, a peaceful nuclear energy program. There's been no case in history where a non-nuclear country has enriched up to 60%. Iran is the first one to do that. So I view this as essentially the Iranians acquiring leverage for a new negotiation and explaining to the U.S. foreign policy community that stupid decisions will cost you, and this is essentially what you have to deal with now. That there's going to be a reaction to bad policy. So
then that's important, because that implies that there are two possible interpretations, that Iran is going up to this because they want to go to nuclear weapons grade so that they can have a bomb, or the second is that they are doing this so that they have negotiating leverage to leverage down. So which do you think it is? Or is there an internal within Iran, as far as you know, a debate whether they should go one way or the other?
Well, there's certainly a debate. I mean, there are advisors around the Supreme Leader's office that have been speaking openly about possibly weaponizing the nuclear program. And I think part of that is a genuine frustration that, previous negotiations with Washington, if they did succeed, they essentially fall apart after a few years. And there's a genuine concern that any agreement that they come to with the Trump administration, really any administration, will be walked away from again in 2 or 3 years' time. So there's a lot of distrust within the Iranian political establishment. The Supreme Leader himself has not gone that far. He hasn't said that he's made the decision to weaponize. And as a matter of fact, the latest U.S. intelligence community report, I think it was released last month, or maybe it was early this month, said that the Iranians have not come to a decision to weaponize. So that's important. There's this confusion. There seems to be this kind of confusion among hardliners that, the decision has been made and the Iranians are a couple weeks away from dashing to a bomb. And technically speaking, that's not correct. That's just not accurate. And politically speaking, that's not accurate. The Supreme Leader has not made that decision one way or the other. The one thing that will make that decision for him is if the United States decides to go the military route, because then the Iranians have no incentive to cooperate with any diplomacy anymore.
Right. That's been one of the things that concerns me the most, is that in saying that our objective is to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, some of our policies that are going down that path may actually be pushing them in that direction and to achieve the exact opposite outcome that we want. I'm going to touch on that in a second about what the ramifications of this could be. But with that kind of baseline setup here, I want to now come to the current time. This is from March the 7th, where Trump gave what sounded like, hey, the decision's already made.
You know, we're down to final strokes with Iran. That's going to be an interesting time. And we'll see what happens. But we're down to the final moments. We're at final moments. You can't let them have a nuclear weapon. It's an interesting time in the history of the world. But we have a situation with Iran that something's going to happen very soon. Very, very soon. You'll be talking about that pretty soon, I guess. And hopefully we can have a peace deal. You know, I'm not speaking out of strength or weakness. I'm just saying I'd rather see a peace deal than the other. But the other will solve the problem.
Now, apparently within both the Trump administration and within elite Washington circles, there is a real, you might even say Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of split on one faction absolutely desiring war above everything, and some going as far as, I would say, to lusting after war with Iran, and then another side saying, this is stupid, don't do it. So it's almost encapsulated in that one thing there, where in the first he's saying, we're almost out of time, we're at the last minute, and then he says, but I'd rather have a negotiated settlement. What is your personal read of how these dynamics are playing on a policy?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't think the Trump administration has fully fleshed out what its policy is going to be honest with you. And quite frankly, these ongoing negotiations right now, I mean, it's a huge step in the right direction, but I'm still a little confused as to what the end goal is. You know, the Trump administration really hasn't articulated what it wants to achieve with these talks. You know,
beyond they can't have a nuclear weapon, that statement, but what that means, I don't know either.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange thing where Trump said that, and then a couple days later, he mentioned that, you know, the Iranians have to give up the concept of having a nuclear weapon, which to me at least suggests that he's kind of envisioning a deal that would essentially force the Iranians to close all their enrichment plants, and basically, you know, go the Muammar Gaddafi route, where he basically, you know,
who wouldn't want to go down that path?
Invited American British inspectors to Libya and handed over the weapons of mass destruction program, right? So, you know, there's definitely an infight, I think, over Iran policy within the Trump administration. You have Marco Rubio and Michael Waltz, who were very well-known Iran hawks when they were members of Congress. And you had Mike Waltz going on television in late March, basically saying what the administration wants is full dismantling, which is just not going to happen. The Iranians are never going to agree to that. So we'll have to see. I mean, we'll have to see. We'll see what happens line is very appropriate, I think, because there's a lot of unanswered questions here that I'll be looking at as these negotiations go on.
Well, let's say I want to take a look first of all at the war hawkers position, because I want you to address some of the specific arguments and claims they make about what's real and what's a fact and what's more like opinion. First of all, let's see. One of the big war hawks is Brother Jack Keane.
The president of the United States is unequivocal in what he's saying. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, and he's issued them an ultimatum. And that ultimatum is pretty simple: voluntarily dismantle your nuclear enterprise completely. And that means give up the enriched uranium, destroy the facilities that make the advanced centrifuges that enable that enriched uranium, destroy the ballistic missiles that would deliver the weapon systems, open Iran to anywhere, anytime inspections, and do it all by a date certain.
Those are some pretty harsh terms right there. Do you know if that's just what Jack Keane thinks was in this so-called ultimatum, this letter that was sent to Iran, or if that's just what he wants to be in the ultimatum?
I think that's what Jack wants Trump to propose to the Iranians. And that's actually a very similar position of what Marco Rubio and Michael Waltz want, is full Iranian capitulation on the nuclear agreement, which, by the way, the Iranians rejected when George W. Bush was president back in 2004. And back then, the Iranians had very little nuclear capability, domestic nuclear capability, I should say, indigenous nuclear capability. to think that they would agree to something like that 20 years later when they're enriching 60% up to 60% grade and have approximately 6,000 working centrifuges is just nonsensical. So these proposals that Jack is kind of talking about on the air, they're made to get an Iranian rejection, right? It's a check the box exercise where what they're really envisioning is military force to completely annihilate Iran's vast nuclear infrastructure, and they genuinely believe that is the way to go, because it doesn't require any concessions on our part, right?
Well, I mean, and talk about somebody who wants the maximalist objectives out. I don't think there's anybody stronger than Senator Tom Cotton.
Is Iran really close to having a nuclear weapon? And is that something we should take seriously? Or as some people say, it's very manageable. Don't be a warmonger. Don't interfere. Don't be a neocon. Just let the good little terrorists do whatever they're going to do, and we'll be just fine.
Yeah, Mark, Iran is very close to having a nuclear weapon, and it's something that we should fear and that we shouldn't tolerate. Donald Trump's been very clear about this for as long as he's been in politics, going back 10 years. In fact, the first conversation I ever had with Donald Trump, he was coming to Arkansas to speak at a Republican Party dinner. I happened to be going to Vienna that weekend to meet with the International Atomic Energy Agency. And he called me and he said that the one thing we can't do is let Iran have a nuclear weapon. And he's been clear about that publicly over and over again, because Iran is not a normal nation. It's a fanatical, theocratic dictatorship. And if they get nuclear weapons, they're likely to use them.
Okay, that fear-mongering thing is one of the better ones, which is why Cotton is one of the best advocates from that perspective, that they are not rational actors. Like, sure, North Korea has nuclear weapons, China has nuclear weapons, Russia has nuclear weapons, but they can all be deterred because they're rational actors. But the Iranians are not, so they will be using their bombs if we get them. What say you?
Yeah, the Iranians have been deterred by U.S. military power in the past. They are rational actors. You know, their foreign policy is quite frankly, disgusting from a moral standpoint, from a U.S. and European, collective West standpoint. But to say that the Iranians are essentially some suicidal cult people who would think nothing of using a nuclear weapon against Israel or the United States or Saudi Arabia or anybody else, knowing full well that the response would be the end of the Islamic Republic as we know it. To argue that point, it's beyond it's beyond fantastical to me. So
and let's look at that. Have you, if Iran were to use a nuclear weapon, do you see anything in their DNA, even for the horrible things that you say that they have done on the domestic, or no, I'm sorry, on the regional level, that they would say, we hate Israel so much that we would commit national suicide in order to take them out?
No, and that's you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, the Islamic Republic's first overriding objective is to stay in power and to continue their regime for as long as humanly possible. And the best way of failing in that objective is to do something stupid and suicidal, like use a nuclear weapon against a country that, has nuclear weapons of its own, by the way. We know Israel has about, 50 nukes in the stockpile, maybe even more. And of course, its conventional military capability is leagues above what the Iranians can produce. So, it's just the people that say that, I mean, they don't have an argument to stand by. And I wish people like Tom Cotton, who likes to market himself as a national security expert in the United States Senate, I wish he would engage a little more responsibility in national television appearances, because the history is just not there. The evidence of the Iranians going freelancing and just causing a nuclear holocaust across the entire Middle East, the evidence is not there. It's just infuriating to listen to these arguments, and somehow they keep getting made.
Right, they do, yeah, and it with great glee by a great many, as you see Mark Levin there, who's definitely the number one talking head, if you want to call him that, I guess, both on his X account as well as on the things that he does on his show. Man, that's one of the common features. He just seems to have this lust for the destruction of Iran, period. Just to get it off the map somehow. I guess he thinks that's going to work. But let's take a look at that aspect of this. And let's say that what Keene suggests, what Cotton is obviously suggesting, is that if we don't get the deal we want, if we don't get the complete subjugation and the Libyan model, so to speak, that you mentioned there, and Iran doesn't agree to those kinds of things, then they want the military option to be brought in. But let's consider the military option. Here is, from an Iranian perspective, how they would handle if they were attacked.
Iran, with regards to defense capabilities, it is prepared for war. It would fight its own wars. It doesn't need like the Russian soldiers or Chinese soldiers or anyone's soldiers. And Iran's allies across the region, especially in Iraq, and in Yemen, as we're seeing, they will have an enormous role to play if there is war. And they would change the map very swiftly. Iran itself, therefore, would be more than capable of firing off missiles, bringing down jets, firing hundreds of thousands of drones. That is a fact. But Iran's relationships with powers like Russia and China are very important. Russia, China today are much closer to Iran than they've ever been before, thanks to the United States. Many thanks to the United States. The war in Ukraine has evolved the relationship.
So let's take a consideration of a number of those things he said there. First of all, that he said elsewhere in that conversation there, he said this claim that that Israel took out all the Iranian air defenses in their last missile strike later last year. He said that's not true. As a matter of fact, he claims that because of things they've gotten from Russia, apparently, that their air defense capability is stronger than it was 6 months ago. Do you have any knowledge about whether they do or don't have air defenses right now?
Well, they do have air defenses. They don't have as many air defense. It's my understanding that they don't have as many air defenses as they did last year. And the Israelis, during those two strikes that the Israelis conducted over Iran, in 2024, they did do a significant amount of damage on Iran's air defenses. So, they're not devoid of those types of weapons platforms, but they do still have some available.
Okay. What about this issue of drones? Because he claimed they have hundreds of thousands of drones that they could use against Israel. Now, we know they've been making a lot for Russia because they've been having that for years now as part of that war where they've been supporting those. But do you have any idea about their domestic stockpiles?
Yeah, I don't know the number of the amount of drones in their stockpile. I do know that the Iranians have made a concerted effort in investing and producing these types of unmanned systems, mainly because they're cheap and they're effective. And quite frankly, when Israel and Iran did that little tit for tat last year, the Iranians predominantly used drones, right? And quite a few of them got past Israeli air defenses and crashed into targets. Thankfully, they didn't do enough damage. They didn't do a lot of damage in Israel, so that's fortunate. But the Iranians have made a concerted decision to invest in these weapons. So I don't know the number, but their output is certainly high. For sure.
Yeah, I remember we had Mike Domino back when he was a Defense Priorities fellow along with us. Now he's the Deputy Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, I think is his official title. But he made the comment at that time when we had him on last year that there was only, I think, 300 drones or a combination of drones and cruise missiles that were used in that second attack. But if it was instead waves of 1,000, 4,000, 5,000, it would have overwhelmed the Iron Dome system, which was able to shoot down a lot of that stuff, especially with U.S. aircraft that were in the air and patrolling at that time. But do you think that the Israeli system could endure those kinds of wave attacks?
It would be very difficult. The Israelis didn't get 100% of the Iranian drones when they were launched last year, right? And as Mike made the comment, there's only about 300 drones and ballistic missiles and cruise missiles that were launched in that wave of attack. And that was just one wave, right? So to envision, having 3 or 4 different waves of, let's say, 1,000 drones apiece in each wave. I mean, the Israelis are capable, but I don't know if any nation, quite frankly, can knock all of them down. I don't even think the United States could do that.
So let's look at the other half of the military equation, because maybe Iran does have some air defense capabilities left. It's probably not great stuff. I mean, we see what gets through the Ukrainian side, and we provide with them a lot of stuff too. So the assumption is that that a lot of our stuff would be able to get through there. But the question is, would they be able to knock out the nuclear program if we did? We know that the U.S. has a lot of B-2s at Diego Garcia right now. There's a couple of aircraft carriers in the region. Of course, all the stuff that Israel has itself. Could that cumulative total knock out the Iranian regime from their nuclear power?
In total, no. But in all honesty, Danny, I think that's the wrong issue to even talk about in this general area. The more important issue, in my opinion, is how the Iranians would respond to an attack like that. So even assuming the best case scenario, we demolish their entire infrastructure, the Iranians could very well make the decision to double down on rebuilding and weaponizing a program that wasn't previously weaponized. Right? I think that's the more important issue in terms of U.S. policy is, even assuming we could destroy the program, is that really the smart play over the long term? Is that just going to encourage the Iranian government to respond by doubling down on an issue that they've invested 30, 35, 40 years of manpower and resources into?
But what about the argument that, well, yeah, they may want to do that, but we'll just bring back another wave because every time they build something, we'll destroy it, so they have to start over from scratch? Or is it the case, or at least part of the case, that even with some of these bunker busters that we would have on some of the B-2 bombers, that some of these things are so far in a mountain that we couldn't get to them? Do we have any knowledge of that?
Every time the Americans or the Israelis have taken covert action against the Iranian nuclear program, the Iranians have responded by burying facilities deeper underground, deeper under mountains, right? So if you view that as, past this prologue, even if we could reach 100% of the facilities and destroy all these centrifuges underground, the Iranians are going to just continue building deeper underground to the point where we won't even be able to reach these these centrifuges anymore. So again, I bring it back to the point where long term, short term, it's kind of an intoxicating idea, right? To use the superior power of the U.S. military to destroy an adversary's crown jewel. But long term, the United States will, in many ways, be creating a different and more difficult problem for itself, because they're going to wake up one morning and find that the Iranians haven't succumbed to what we want them to succumb to. They've retaliated by starting from scratch, and by the way, they have advanced nuclear knowledge to do it. You can't wipe out knowledge. You can wipe out buildings. You can't wipe out scientists who understand.
Unless you literally kill everyone, which I don't think that we're going to go down that path. But correct me if I'm wrong. Even though we pulled out of the JCPOA, there is still some iteration of it going on, meaning there are still UN inspectors even right now in Iran. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. The Iranians have curtailed a lot of the inspections, the special inspections under the JCPOA, but there are still inspectors that go through Iran's main nuclear complexes. And of course, it just takes one Iranian decision overnight to expel all of them. And
that's where I was going to go. So in the event that you made an attack or a joint attack with Israel, or that Israel did it on its own, you can pretty well be assured that all the inspectors would leave the next day, and that would be it. So anything that happens in the future, we don't even have limited eyes on the ground. Is that correct?
That is correct. And, even the Iraqis did this, right? In the 1990s. Of course, they turned out they didn't have any nuclear weapons at all. We could spend an entire episode on that issue, but it's a very simple way to retaliate. It doesn't take much for the Iranians to basically tell these inspectors, get the hell out of our country.
And so from that point forward, with what we wouldn't even know, I don't think our BDA would be able to tell us with any certainty what was and what wasn't destroyed. And so from that point forward, then we would be totally blind in the West to what was happening, and to the point that we may one day wake up, to your comment there a second ago, to an underground nuclear test. I mean, that seems to be a very plausible outcome.
It's plausible, and I don't know how likely it is, but it would. I would make the assessment that it's likelier after the United States takes military action than it would be today. Today, the Iranians don't seem to be interested in actually weaponizing the program, but I brought to the point I made earlier in the show. If the Americans decide to take the military option, the Iranians don't have any reason to cooperate with us anymore. I mean, they're going to respond by increasing their deterrent against U.S. or any foreign military engagement.
Yeah. And, one of the things that really causes me a lot of trouble about the Tom Cottons, about the Jack Keens, about the John Boltons, who are so eager to get into a war with Iran, nobody ever thinks about the and then what. So you bomb them and they don't submit, they don't capitulate. Then what? Now then you've got us into an open-ended conflict that I don't know how it's going to end, unless you want to go in with 500,000 troops and go in and just, go from one end of the country to the next to have your regime change war, which nobody in America would do. We don't have the military for it. And if you don't have that option, then all you've got is this open-ended thing where we're just going to be lobbing back and forth missiles. And the thing we didn't discuss at all, which I know is something you talk about a lot, the vulnerability of American troops scattered throughout the Middle East, especially in Syria and Iraq, would be absolutely wide open to being killed by Iranian missiles.
That's right. We still have close to 2,000 troops in Syria. We have close to 3,000 troops in Iraq. We have a lot of large bases around the Persian Gulf, all of which are perfectly distanced from Iran's ballistic missile capability. Iran's missiles can reach all of those facilities. And as you know, in the past, in Iraq and Syria, U.S. bases have been attacked repeatedly by so-called Iranian proxies, mainly, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. And in many cases, Americans have died from those attacks or been grievously injured. So that the Iranians don't, it's not like the Iranians don't have any cards to play. They may be weaker. They certainly are weaker in terms of conventional military power, but they're not going to roll over in the event that the United States decides to launch a preemptive military operation against them.
One of the other, we also had Professor Ted Postal on our show a few times talking about the Iranian missile capabilities and some of these outposts that we just saw on the map there that we have throughout this area. And he said that while some of these have good air defenses at the tactical level, like from Katyusha rockets and the like, or drones, et cetera, like we've seen several times, not almost none of them, but a very few of them actually have theater ballistic missile defense, meaning some of these missiles come in there and whatever we have would be useless. And if they're on target, then there's going to be American casualties. And of course, then you have, and that's what I'm thinking, if you go down this path and Iran does strike back and kill, now then you have higher motivation that you've lost American troops now. To the president, whether he would want to or not, he can't do nothing. And then you have the risk of potentially escalating, and there's no obvious off-ramp for that. That's just why it seems to me, and argue with me if you can, that there is nothing but downside for us to use military force against Iran.
The costs the costs outweigh the benefits. That's really the simple way of putting it. The one benefit a military force would have is degrading Iran's capability by maybe a couple months. And then the Iranians will build up again, and we'll have to do it again. And, that's the kind of spiral snowball effect that could cause a direct confrontation between, the Americans and the Iranians, and not only the Iranians, but their proxies around the region. My point is, why even go down that road?
Yeah.
Why even do it? You have a diplomatic process playing out today. And as long as both parties can find a way to be reasonable and kind of leave their maximalist demands at the door, we have a pretty good chance of resolving this, or at least managing this diplomatically. Not for a couple months or a couple years, but perhaps 15, 20 years down into the future. Remember, the JCPOA was a 10, 15-year deal that basically capped Iran's capabilities, for close to 2 decades in some aspects. Would I trade a 15-year deal for a 1-year, a military operation that can maybe delay it for 1 year? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, that's a great point, man. Really does. And in the last few minutes we have here, I want to ask your opinion on one other aspect of this, and that is in relations to what Iranian capacities are for response if we go in with a bombing package, et cetera. And that's not even directly against the United States, but against other regional players in the area, which I've seen some reports anyway, that Iran has threatened that we might go after the Strait of Hormuz, we might go after Qatar, we might go after Saudi Arabia, some of their facilities as well, because if we're going to be attacked, y'all are all going down with it, especially you who are friendly to the United States. How much concern do you have about that possibility?
I actually think the Strait of Hormuz option is vastly overdone. I don't think the Iranians would want to do that. And the reason I say that is because they export a lot of their own crude oil through the strait. So they would basically be cutting them off their own arm in that case. The one thing I do think is possible, and the Iranians have done this in the past, is take a pot shot at Saudi Arabia's oil installations. And, back in 2019, there was actually a coordinated cruise missile and drone strike on on Saudi Arabia's biggest oil processing facility, and it wiped out the kingdom's output by half for a couple of days.
Yeah, I remember
it had a pretty significant impact on the market. It was a short-term impact, but it had an impact nonetheless. So I think that's probably the route the Iranians could take if their back is against the wall. But again, I return to the point where none of this has to happen. If we continue to be persistent and pragmatic at the negotiating table, and I think that's what we need to do. I hope Trump does it.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree with you more on there. And the one thing I hope our viewers take out of this is that all the stuff we're talking about here and the possible reactions to an American or an Israeli attack are not these kind of wild-eyed things that just really unlikely thing that could happen, but these are in the realm of likely or probable outcomes. These things are the chances that Iran would just take all of these shots in the mouth and then literally lay down and do nothing, it seems to me to be pretty low. And why take the risk that they would do the probable things, which could radically make our world, our life in that part of the world far more worse. And then it's an open-ended problem with no easy options to do what you said is on the table right now, which is have a decent negotiated settlement that could push this whole thing out for another decade or more, depending on how it's written, that could get everybody a chance for peace. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
You're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, I guess that's the case. But hopefully that we can get these two choir directors on the same sheet of music and get other people to see that it is logical, it is rational, it is moral to go down a path that has a good chance of success, as opposed to the one that has almost no chance of producing anything positive for the United States or the region. We'll have to wait and see how it goes. But I guess when is the next set of negotiations supposed to take place?
This weekend. There was supposed to be some technical discussions tomorrow, but they postponed it for Saturday. So the next round is going to be, and that's going to be the third round, is this Saturday. And I suspect, yeah. So I suspect Witkoff, Special Envoy Witkoff, and the Iran's foreign minister Arakchi could possibly meet again for a brief interaction like they did during the first round. We'll have to wait and see.
Well, we'll certainly be tracking a lot of that. And by the way, you've for those who are interested, you've written something recently in the Telegraph on this subject here, which had a headline apparently you did not choose, but you said this does not show exactly what you were looking at here. But we have the Trump is stumbling into a war with Iran. You said that was not your headline, but it's nevertheless in the Telegram. We have that link in the description below that people can go see that. And as I understand, you have something else coming out soon. Where can people look if they want to find out more?
That should be in the LA Times, perhaps tomorrow morning. And that's essentially going to be an overarching review of where the negotiations stand right now, and where they could go in the next weeks, the weeks and months to come. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, right now we have very little information coming from the outside, and I suspect that's actually a good sign. There aren't many leaks going on. And,
right. Very unusual in this current
Very unusual.
So let's hope that continues on and leads somewhere good. Thanks ever so much for coming on today, Dan. This has been a great session.
Thank you, Danny.
And we appreciate you guys too. And by the way, we got a triple header coming up on Daniel Davis Deep Dive tomorrow. You're not going to want to miss that. Be sure to watch our channel down there, and you'll see it in the morning when all those things pop up. But as usual, we got some surprises for you. We got some good guests coming in tomorrow. A lot of things happening. You're not going to want to miss it. Thanks very much, and we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.